Hello and welcome to Emergent. My name is Reed Summers. Happy to be with you all tonight to share what I hope will be a lively conversation as you ask me anything. I'm opening myself up to being queried and grilled and asked the hard questions, the deep questions, questions that probe at what we do not know, what we may not be able to know. I invite you to submit those questions at the new site called Forerunner, which I have developed and built along with the team over at Emergent as a platform for the truth seeking pioneers out there in the UFO community who are endeavoring on the front lines of this phenomenon and our potential human engagement with non human forms of life. So, if you're new to Emergent, head over to Forerunner. If you're on Forerunner right now, welcome. Glad you made it to the platform. You should be watching this right there on the homepage. I shared several days ago a thread and invited you to ask your questions. And so I've been looking through those. I'm going to go through them question by question with you all. Just wanted to reflect briefly on this moment and just highlight that we are seeing unprecedented movement towards greater transparency and potentially effective disclosure on the UAP Enigma. We are seeing whistleblowers like Matthew Brown come forward with significant testimony on the Immaculate Constellation unacknowledged special access program to gather UAP data within the U.S. government. We're seeing statements somewhat to be deathbed statements by, for example, Harold Malmgren, the late Harold Malmgren, talking about the long and storied history of the U.S. government's involvement on this topic, how deeply this issue has penetrated the halls of power, potentially affected everything from technology, foreign adversary engagement, all the way down to presidents and the potential assassination of presidents in the case of JFK. So, some really unprecedented testimony coming out now. It seems like every week or two there is someone new stepping forward, breaking ranks, um, doing the right thing, and coming forward with what they know. And I'm having a hard time keeping up with it myself. I hope Forerunner can be a place where you can bring important and credible information, share it with others, cross-check your assessments, and contribute to our collective understanding of this emergent new frontier of what happens when our species comes in contact with another species or multiple species. What are the emergent new qualities of humanity as it steps out of its isolated island mentality, believing itself to be alone in the vastness of the seas, the oceans, the vastness of space and the universe, and realizes that no, we are at the center of a potential crossroads of interaction with other forms of life, a truly continental reality. And we have to challenge that island mentality that says that we are alone, we are special. If they come, it's because they're interested in us. We must be inordinately unique and worthy of visitation. When really, we might just be at the center of activity, and there may have been actions we took as a species to provoke renewed scrutiny of our world and a potential visitation or a special kind of visitor who might respond to some of the events of the 20th century. So I just want to acknowledge, that this issue is rolling into the public. People are beginning to think about this. They're beginning to overcome their own obstacles, cognitive obstacles, to seriously entertaining the possibility that we are not alone, not just in the universe, but in our own world. That our governments, in plural, have been in long-standing engagement on this topic, and that the presence itself and whatever intent and whatever intelligence is behind it has potentially taken up a position in our world. It has an interest, a potential stake in the human outcome. And that might partly be accounted for in some of the shifts that we are seeing geopolitically, technologically, socially. We don't know. This is the emergent new frontier. So, welcome. Thank you for being here. This is the first AMA I have ever done, and I'm happy to do it with you all. And I know many of you have been watching the show, some of you every episode since I launched it last October. And so, a great opportunity to pause, gather, huddle up the wagons, and see what we can come to know together. I posted on X just before this show that the responsibility of the first responders to this phenomenon is to think their way all the way up to the line of what can be known, the line of knowability. And once we get there, once we hit that hard surface of the true known unknowns of this phenomenon, but the known unknowns that we know we need to know, right? There's necessity to know them. That's when we investigate. And I know tonight's episode will be right there on that line of the known unknowns. And, a lot of I don't have all the answers, by the way, right? And neither does anyone. And so a lot of what's going to be called for here is a new citizen advocacy, possible activism effort, not only around contesting government secrecy, human cover up of this phenomenon, but contesting or at least calling out the non human secrecy and the non human cover up as well. This is the interspecies point of connection. That's where the activism, the advocacy is also needed. And I see very, very few people thinking in that way, acting on behalf of Team Humanity and calling out what is happening with this phenomenon as it relates to our base human interest for safety, for survival, for development. And more people are needed. So I know we're going to be venturing right up to that frontier tonight. And again, there are ways to get involved, and we'll talk through those. So with that, let me go over to the Q&A thread. You should be seeing this on the screen now. Do we have this up? There we go. All right. So, folks, I'm going to march through this in linear fashion. So, whoever asked the first question, kudos, because you're getting the best of me. After an hour and a half of being grilled on a virtual platform, you may not get the best of me. So, here we go. So, let's go to Michelle's question. I think there are a number of them in here, some really good articulation of various dilemmas. So let me just try to call out. I'll read the opening few sentences, try to go right to the questions. So Michelle says, it doesn't appear that NHI are present in our world to directly invade or take over using physical force and advanced technologies in a military manner. If so, they probably would have already done so. The sense I have from the data and evidence I've been exposed to is that any, quote, invasion to exploit us in our world in any way is requiring a much more subtle or subverting approach. So, why is this? Can they themselves not become united in a single cause, each race having its own agenda, area of interest, and means, knowing that a direct invasion by any of them could result in an all out war between them? So, let me take that first question. I think, it's a very plausible starting point to assume that we are engaging multiple NHI. I don't think we should necessarily assume that these are individual NHI species, like with a single world of origin. We may be engaging a multi-species organization, several of them. I say that again, the continental reality of life and interaction in an interstellar context. What is to say that planetary systems are what bound the development of a species? Once you develop faster than light FTL travel, would you not traverse many planetary bodies, or go to many planetary bodies, traverse many star systems, become a truly interstellar, non planet based form of life? Would you potentially engage in what you might call acts of God, which is the genetic alteration of your own kind to create multiple classes or tiers of one's kind? Is this partly what we see in the reported entities, for example, the tall grays, the short grays, entities that might have a common origin but are truly different in their morphology? Are these engineered life forms with a common origin? So I think we are seeing some signals that we're engaging different NHI entities, physical entities. Um, they often, as reported, are interacting together in the same setting. So you might have a tall gray and a mantid entity, or a short gray and a mantid entity, which suggests some sort of truly interspecies program, or even organization of some kind. So are we being engaged by a multi-species set of entities? I think there's a possibility we are. Now, as I've shared many times, I think there's a strong indication that we are observing a unique 20th century contact event. I don't think this is the only contact event that's ever happened for humanity. I wouldn't be surprised if it goes back to the beginnings of recorded history, prehistory, ancient hominid development, right? We don't know the true nature and scope of how this world, this island, as we like to imagine it, might have been visited or interacted with. Um, so we're going to be gaining some insight into that as we gain insight into them, who's here now. But suffice it to say, I think a combination of factors prompted a new visitor. And I would say, evidently, it was the world wars, the development of nuclear power and weapons, the use of nuclear weapons, and the continued testing of nuclear weapons on Earth in the form of over 2,000 nuclear detonations that have taken place since the bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. With that, the rapid deterioration of the Earth's environment, a sixth mass extinction, a technological hockey stick, which is also connected to the degradation of the planet and its habitability, and in fact is directly threatening it. But with that technological development, we are, in a sense, reaching up to what might be their exosystemic reality of technology. We are extending out of our primitive ancestral roots, right, of hunter gathering and spears and arrows and all that, and we're going beyond the industrial revolution of using high density energy sources to create power and to create motion and vehicular travel and things like that that are allowing us then, of course, to exploit the Earth's resources, to bring that resources to the surface. We have built a global system of communications and commerce. We have developed IT or technological data systems that are collecting data about our species in rapid form every second of every day. And we are, deliberately or not, leaking that out into the exosystemic environment for others to pick up, to detect. It's funny to me how SETI is waiting down here on Earth, almost like waiting at the phone, waiting for the phone to ring, listening for radio signals, right? And do we know that we are transmitting via those same technological platforms the bulk of our species' modern history? And enormous amounts of everything from medical data, ethnographic data, linguistic data. I mean, we are literally sending it out there. So, to a discrete observer, if we are assuming that they would speak to us, wouldn't we also assume that they would want to ingest what we send to them? Makes sense to me. So back to the question, there might be a scenario at play where, through our overt actions on this planet in the last 100 years, we have prompted a visitor who is either interested, concerned, or intent on exploitation of Earth, humanity, the rich biological environment that we have here on the planet, the possibly unique mineral composition of the surface crust of our planet. We don't know, but we have definitely prompted a visitor, a set of visitors. Now, if one visitor came, and let's just imagine for a moment, they just had a self-interested position. They were here to see what was going on, what they could either learn, what they could extract or gain, see if they can take some samples, conduct some science, see if there's any usable resources down here, learn about biology and arising of sentient life on a terrestrial planet, which may not be the most common way sentient life, resides out there in the universe. If they were to come and if they were to see that this is a rich planetary environment, that in fact the planet itself is valuable, that we are in the act of effectively altering its habitability on a time scale very relevant to another form of sentient life, meaning we could diminish the habitability of this planet for thousands of years, maybe tens or hundreds of thousands of years. That's meaningful if you take an interest in the planet. So let's say that force, let's imagine it is multiracial. It's not, we didn't attract them from their distant planet. They were already floating out there, right? Looking, inquiring, uh, and they realize that there's opportunity. There is something to gain or something to learn. Maybe they see us as useful or integrating with us as useful. Now, how do they enact a program to advance those kinds of goals? Well, being super intelligent, highly technological, and having existed presumably in an exopolitical environment where competition and collaboration have existed for a long time, they've probably developed certain strategies that would be highly effective in our environment. Also, we might assume that they are numerically inferior to us. There may not be that many of them, and there are a whole lot of us. Also, we are a very divided world. So the opportunity to take up a position to engage key actors as collaborators and to transact access for, who knows, technology, or maybe just trinkets from space that we would say are life-saving technologies, I think is real. Now, if they come, is it possible, because we imagine ourselves at the center of this grand saga, right? So we are the object of interest. And we have attracted one or several, and they are coming to us because we matter, right? Well, little do we know that they have their own vast web of relationships and interactions, probably. And they bring that with them. And so if one entity or group came, would that call forth whatever competitors they might have or collaborators? So basically, does one draw many? I think that's a plausible scenario, and I have heard. I'm not the only one who has assessed this to be true, but I've heard others. Gary Nolan has spoken to this, Eric Davis, and others that we might be observing a half dozen or under 10 or maybe over 10 groups present in our world here competing for some kind of position, some kind of access. Now, is that access with good intent? Is it with self interested intent? Or is it with hostile or intent to truly undermine humanity? That is yet to be determined for all of us to verify. But um, I do see signs that we are encountering a contest among NHI for access and opportunity. There is hearsay about altercations in the air between different classes of UAP. In the historical record, there are references to UAP dogfights. We certainly have reports of different structured craft, and the appearance of those different shapes has changed dramatically over time. The preponderance of saucers tapered off decades ago, as did cigar shaped craft, whereas luminous orbs has escalated tremendously. Some have surmised that those might be drone craft. And so, are we observing not occupied craft, but drones that are maybe more evasive, able to cloak themselves better, knowing that our technologies to detect and track are growing. So, we're seeing a change in the force composition, and there is definite hearsay and some credible testimony that different NHI have been seen working with different human actors, different governments. There is definitely seems a signal that whatever the NHI presence is, it zoomed right to our power centers. It went right to the U.S. government, maybe the Italian fascist regime, World War II, maybe the Nazi regime, China, Russia. It seems intent to engage with power centers. People in religious settings have reported what they might perceive as some form of psychic or spiritual intervention by these potential NHI. So, our NHI taking interest in our religious power centers. I do think that there are strong indications that whatever this presence is, and again, it's a plurality, is seeking to involve itself. Um, if this is a self-interested or detrimental set of forces, how would that coexist with a set of neutral or beneficial forces? If there's a program to gain advantage in the world, to steer humanity, to maybe integrate with humanity, how would that tolerate the presence of a beneficial force? And wouldn't the beneficial force, to be beneficial, have to directly intervene and militarily, kinetically stop the hostile presence? I struggle to imagine a beneficial form of life caring that much about this planet and us, assuming again that we're not the center of the grand narrative, to enact that much effort to stop what might be, some interested parties looking for planetary access, planetary resource, etc. So, we might be seeing equivalent forces in competition, potentially in collaboration, and it'll be very difficult for us to fully discern friend from foe. It's all the more so difficult because there are a lot of NHI communications entering the world, some of which may represent a concerted effort to shape human perception and to effectively disinform people as to the phenomenon. So, I mean, if you were a hostile actor, you're not just going to be hostile overtly, right? You're going to generate a parallel presence by appearance that looks beneficial, and you'll say that's us, and the hostile is them, right? You'll parse the field. You'll make it so complex that human beings may not be able to decode what is going on. So, great question. Let's move on. I have a lot more to get to here. Okay. Could their indirect approach and secrecy mean that somehow they need humanity's permission for them to carry out their intent? I would probably say unlikely. UAP activity have acted brazenly around military entities. Um, some have described it as almost orthogonal presence, meaning it's just like a right angle intrusion, right, just transects our human reality without much regard for what works for us, for what we want and value. So I don't think they're hanging back, waiting for diplomatic permission to be here. That's definitely not indicated. Let's see here. Their mental abilities. This is quite scary, really scary. How do we safeguard ourselves from this being used against us? How do we then, as a race, support the evolution of our own mental capacity? Great question. How do we strengthen our mental environment? Okay. Well, we're going to get into this, I'm sure, more later, but um, it is alarming. I would counsel you not to feel too scared. I get the sense that the NHI presence would love for us to think that they are much more powerful than they are, more numerous than they are. And you definitely see that in some of these claimed narratives of a prison planet, or some sort of, almost Abrahamic battle between good and darkness happening in our skies by different NHI. This could all be a narrative play. This could all be said to impress upon us that we need exterior input or help. We need NHI technologies. We cannot rescue ourselves. Right? It's overwhelming. And for those who are aware that there is a hostile element to the presence, they have also reported a sense of almost intimidation to speak about that, to share it with others. And I'm not surprised if that were also part of the overall project, which is, if you're operating a program covertly that's not in the best interests of the natives, some natives are going to become aware of it inevitably, right? So what do you do about that? Well, there are probably numerous psychological intimidation tactics. There might be other societal, social engineering tactics that could make these people feel, harassed or are unable to speak in public, etc. So I know the reality of the psi engagement with NHI is potentially overwhelming to consider at first, but there are ways to gain proficiency in that environment and to effectively protect your mind and to exert force in that environment, because that's what you need to do. You need to stand up tall, hold your chin back, and act like you are a psi level entity, because you are, right. We exist in that domain, as do they. They just have had a lot of time to develop capabilities and also technologies to interface with it. But there are ways to guard the mind and to exert force. Okay, let's move on to another question. This is from Frank. It doesn't appear that NHI are present in our world to directly invade. Oh, this is quoting the prior question. That's actually a comment on the prior question. I'll move on. Okay, Claudio. Thank you, Reed, for the opportunity to engage in this AMA. What role do you see for those of us who are aware of an active NHI presence in the world? How can we meaningfully contribute to Earth's preparation? Okay, and the next question is a very good one. I'm going to spend some time on it. Well, becoming aware opens up new possibilities for action. Most people, because this is an impossibility, have not even gone to the point of possibility, let alone probability, let alone assessing that we are encountering physical non-human intelligences. So, congratulations for being at that place. I'm certainly happy I am too, because if you're still back in impossibility or just possibility, you're exploring at best, right? You haven't landed on terra firma with this phenomenon. If you can land on solid ground, make that starting assessment, then we get to the much more exciting side of the process, which is proposing key actions, negotiating those with others' key actions, and becoming an advocate for that and working actually to get that done. So, well, first off, what you can do is normalize the UFO conversation. I would talk about this with everybody. I would just ask them, hey, what do you think? What do you think about UAP, UFO? You've been hearing this in the news, seeing the congressional briefings? What do you think? You'll find that probably 7 or 8 out of 10 people are interested and open, definitely, to talking about it. Okay, that's great. And so basically work with them. Be a credible advocate for awareness on the issue, help them expand into this possibility, and then land some key probabilities for them to consider. It's like in the historical record, you may not know, but people have reported encountering biological entities, like real physical beings with heads, necks, hands, feet. What does that mean? Does that mean we live in an environment replete with life, all of which is living within certain evolutionary constraints and have to, go through the difficult process of finding out how to survive, right? So, if so, what would that indicate about the potential visitation? So you can have this great conversation with just about anyone. To me, there's a question on disclosure. How can we get to disclosure? That is disclosure. You can disclose the phenomenon every single day. And if you're an experiencer of it, all the more so. Speak your experience. I would also say, if you're at the point of assessment or beyond, um, there are real opportunities for investigative work. We have a data set on them as well. It has hundreds and hundreds of thousands of data points that have been collected over 80 years by great researchers. Who's using it? Who's using AI to do pattern recognition on the UAP data set? It's very nascent, those efforts. And so if you've got any interest or skill in the arena, or even no skill, who cares? Get involved. There are ways to help in the investigation of this presence in the human interest, right? To beneficially prefer that good human outcomes occur, because bad human outcomes could very well occur from this phenomenon, and not least of which because just humans doing human stuff, right? This whole foreign adversary, big tech competition, which could have disclosure under its skin, could have reverse engineering under its skin. It's hot and combustible enough to start a real war. I wouldn't be surprised if a regional conflict erupted, basically provoked by this issue. Of course, it'll never be acknowledged. In fact, it might be used to preempt public awareness of this issue. Wouldn't be surprised at that either. Um, but the opportunity for citizens to get engaged are tremendous. I'll rattle off at the end a number of organizations doing credible field research, building up our societal capability to detect UAP and to understand their movements, because everything is a data point, right? So, how do UAP transit in the sky? Data point. What urban centers are they concentrated on? Data point. What coastlines? What military bases? What nuclear facilities? It's all data. Okay. And even if we can't gain full understanding, if we can demonstrate presence and then slowly begin to map that on top of other data sources like testimonial data, how exciting would that be? To basically understand, what is the distribution of people who are reporting physical encounters? And how does that map on top of a geospatial map of UAP activity? I don't know if anyone's ever done that. I would love to be involved in doing that. That sounds fascinating. So those efforts are coming into play. Okay, question two. It's a good one. What role do you see for those of us who are aware? I'm sorry, in your view, what are the most critical misunderstandings or blind spots within the current UFO UAP disclosure movement that may be hindering awareness and action? Oh, well, I have a list. I made a list before this show. Um, and anyone who watches Emergent knows that I am constantly pushing the boundary and pushing some buttons along with it in the UAP crowd, because there's always the potential that we will become our own worst enemy in this. So let me pull up my list. Can't find it now. Let's see here. There it is. Okay. Well, I think we are still bound up in a human centric framing of the UAP controversy. This is really about human power, brokers, governments, military agencies, companies, hiding secrets from the public and denying us access to a greater knowledge of reality and science and everything else. True, not false, true. But is that the center of the controversy? Why is no one questioning the secrecy of the NHI? Thoroughly documented, right? And so, as long as we point fingers at each other, we are setting ourselves up for an endless battle. Human battles don't end quick, right? Family feuds, conflicts between great powers in the world. It's like it never ends. We humans are great at fighting and perpetuating our fights. And more that we remain distracted and exhausted, pointing fingers, the more that this presence operates at will without any societal understanding of its activity. That's a problem. So let's recenter the controversy on NHI, on the visitation and us being the visited or the visitee. The other is this kind of default government bad, NHI good assumption. It's almost like there's a messiah complex developing out there where because they can do amazing feats in the air and because they haven't been overtly hostile, they must therefore be better than us, at least, if not more. A huge grand assumption. We do not know. We do not know what these entities are, what their intentions are, and what they have truly been doing, especially with regards to vulnerable populations. I'm thinking now about some of the more uncomfortable aspects of the experiencer phenomenon, including that of missing peoples, right? So we do not have any insight into what degree NHI have a part in a variety of phenomena in society, not least of which the hundreds of thousands of missing people presently in the US, even right now. Now, there are great people, David Paulides comes to mind, who are trying to work on that issue and uncover the UFO connection. So, but we need to know. With that, nuclear incursions, clearly a message of peace, right? Clearly not necessarily a message of peace. Clearly, they could be many things, one of which testing our abilities, seeing if they can turn on or turn off, possibly to stop a nuclear altercation, which you could say, well, again, peace. And it's like, not necessarily. Maybe the planet is important to them and they don't want us using nuclear weapons down here. Okay. Um, that's important to me too. But what is their true intent for taking an interest in the planet? So we just don't know enough to make these broad blanket assumptions about things like that. I would also say, there's kind of there's a default thinking out there that we need hard evidence, nothing but hard evidence. Too much testimony, no more whistleblowers, hard evidence. I think that is shooting ourselves in the foot, setting ourselves up for failure. Who has the hard evidence? Who has been keeping it from our access all along, right? So don't re empower the power broker. Equip society with its own abilities to gather hard evidence. Ooh, that would be a great idea. And there are organizations doing that. Um, Category inflation, NHI, meaning everything that's not human, right? All the way up to the almighty. I mean, this is not a helpful framing of this phenomenon to say that NHI is everything in the bucket but us. Now we're not focusing on anything. So to begin to focus on the physical NHI, the potential psi capabilities of the physical NHI. As for non-corporeal entities, demons, ghosts, deceased relatives, if we lump all that in, this movement is going to go nowhere. Trust me. Um, okay, and then this thing of technology. You know, there's this default thinking that NHI tech needs the tech to save our world, and we need access to this. To change or obstruct the climate crisis effectively, a lot of people assume that clean or free energy from non-human entities would do the trick. I would say I don't think so. And the reason is that to fix the climate crisis, you have to alter human activity. It's not a technology problem. It's an activity problem. We already have clean energy, right? It's actually deployable at scale. Um, maybe not fully deployable at scale on the timeline necessary, but bulk of our human crises relate to our activity, not the technology that empowers us to change, our use of energy, et cetera, or pollution. So I would just really contest this whole NHI tech to save the world narrative. And then last, I think there is an intentional or an inadvertent scattering of the bones on this anthropological dig that we are all a part of. We are like anthropologists in the field, and we have discovered evidence of a non-human entity, a bone here, a bone there. Okay, and so what do, right? Well, you don't just go wander the hillsides and arc off a 100-mile diameter dig site and expend your very limited resources on trying to find bones on different mountainsides. Focus on where we are now. And I would say that there is a spinal column right there in the dirt, right in front of us. But we continue to scatter the bones. We continue to, in a sense, self obfuscate and resist making any conclusive statements about the physicality of the phenomenon, its its seeming motives and intentions, especially regarding everything from nuclear weapons to the environment to other aspects of where they seem to be focused in on, um, and also to neglect the bulk human testimony regarding direct encounters. We continue to throw that to the wind. And so we're wandering the hills looking for, teeth and fingernails when there is a spinal column right there. There is something we can assess and begin to leverage off of to make an argument in society. We're being visited by physical, non-human, alien entities. If that's uncomfortable, we got to figure out why. Why is it so hard to conclude that and move from there? Why do we have to back out and then go into consciousness and non-physical, divine, angelic, demonic? I understand our sense of the universe, our ontology is being altered via this interaction, and that's necessary to rethink reality itself. But we don't have to rethink the phenomenon every Monday entirely and reinvent the wheel. There are key fundamentals that we should be anchored in on. Okay, good question. How can parents, teachers, and mentors help young people stay clear minded and resilient? It's a great question. I don't know if we're at the point of being able to tell other parents, teachers, and mentors about this phenomenon. This is why we need disclosure. Disclosure opens up awareness, and with awareness, so much can happen. Without disclosure, that is difficult. It's person by person. Um, but I mean, to the degree that we are strong life forms in this interspecies exchange, we will be resilient in the face of whatever we encounter. So, mental strength, balanced living, uh, not cultivating hostility towards each other, maintaining faith in our own institutions of our civilization. Like this will be good no matter what we encounter out there. And there's a lot more we can do. Okay, let's move on to a question here from Crystal. I read, I have heard several times you reference a quote half dozen potential NHI races and factions. I'm wondering how much you can speak to the relationship between these varied groups. Are some in competition and others in cooperation? We kind of covered this. The idea that we and our planet could be the unwitting spoils of a proxy war between NHI factions is stunning. Agreed. It's shocking enough to reach the realization that NHI is intervening in the world. Next level shocking that there could be multiple factions fighting over it. I agree. I think we are encountering something complex. It's not simplistic. It's not CERN who's who, especially when there are attempts to shape our. So, what do we need to do as a species? Do we need to declare a détente in the engagement, a forced removal of NHI from the Earth planetary system? Say, you guys wait out there, out by the Kuiper Belt, right? We'll set up some sort of diplomatic mission or facility on the moon, on the bright side of the moon, the side of the moon that we can see, not the dark side. If you guys are over there, you better get off. And we will engage you there, right? At a time of our choosing, and we will govern that interaction with existing or newly formed international treaty level organizations, right? The UN will stand up an Office of NHI Affairs. We will have delegates, representation, shared common values in the engagement, and we will bring that to the table. And those will be the rules of engagement, right? So maybe that's a position to take. Now, if there's resistance to that, if NHI will not remove themselves from our planetary system, despite a common statement of human intent, which could be made, that's a data point. What does that indicate, right? So, but I think we have to get our human intent together. Part of the problem, we are so divided that we are inclined to fight each other endlessly over so many grievances that we're ripe. We're ripe for division, further division. So we might be seeing a scenario by which different NHI have slightly different objectives, different objects of interest, whether that's access, resources, biological resources, even psi level abilities, right? Are NHI interested in our telepathic abilities? Are they activating those abilities? Are they through direct physical encounter? Is there an effort to open up these vestigial abilities and be able to turn up the antenna or down when they choose remotely? Um, we can speculate out on that frontier quite a lot, and I think we need to begin to do so. But imagine a scenario where there is an NHI that is really interested in those biological resources. Imagine another NHI that is fascinated in our telepathic abilities and how those could be networked together to gain some insight into the Earth, possibly certain non-human technologies that are stored on the Earth. Interesting. Okay. Imagine there are NHI who are interested in this as some kind of base of operation, some kind of it's really its location that is strategically valuable to them. Because we don't know what kind of interplanetary routes of trade and travel exist, what kind of common longstanding agreements exist, etc. There is probably an exopolitical environment, and so I would imagine different interests are at play, and they might collaborate to meet shared objectives. Now, might some be resisted? Might all be resisted by certain state actors, certain superpowers in the world? I think there are indications that, at least in the West, certain countries have taken an oppositional stance to UAP. We're actually seeing that come out real time in very great detail uh, regarding these UAP shoot downs, the use of directed energy weapons to take down UAP. Um, the fact that presidents might even be killed around this, right? I mean, this. It's either if it's a human secrecy only, my goodness, we've got a problem. But if it's a dual secrecy, we've got a really big problem because which is the cart, which is the horse, right? Or is it a caravan train of both feeding each other? Is it a feedback loop? So, but I would imagine, as NHI look down upon this planet, that they would see opportunities to embed themselves with different competing actors. Is this part of the breakdown of the present world order into a multipolar world? A willingness for certain countries to suffer the complete loss of trade relationships with other countries, to isolate themselves, to develop their own sphere of influence, and to sacrifice the existing global functioning order, and to fractionalize into regional hemispheres. Is NHI a part of that? Are they encouraging that breakdown? We don't know. But this whole thing of technology, well, technology is a big part of the competition between superpowers right now. The race to AGI, right? Would NHI want to see us race to AGI? Would they be able to interface with that other life form, the artificial, intelligent life form that we presume to have created? Would they be able to interface with that better than they can with us and thus affect us through it as a proxy? I think these are possibilities. Okay. Let's move on. In lecture one of my course, Decoding Alien Intent, I was confused by something. Some reports mentioned directed energy weapons being given by the sole survivor of the Roswell crash. That was from Harold Milgram. Later, there was his account of a UAP down in the Bluegill Triple Prime test, apparently by a directed energy weapon. Another slide I presented contained a quote from Philip Colonel Corso. Described the dynamic with NHI. As long as we were incapable of defending ourselves, we had to allow them to intrude as they wished, and that they used that against us. So, a summary of that quote. If this relationship was clear and adversarial from the beginning, why would the Roswell survivor have given humans an energy weapon that could later be used against NHI? Well, there's probably too few details to fully determine that. Of course, that was Harold Malmgren saying that he had been shown footage of this entity, and I believe heard that the entity had conveyed maybe just key information that led to the development of these energy weapons. Did that individual encourage our development of them? I'm not sure I specifically heard that. Although Jesse Michaels did posit after that statement was made, are we engaged in an NHI proxy war? Sorry, are we in the midst of one? Not engaged in one. Are we in the midst of one? So, again, Early on in the process of discovery, is it possible that there were beneficial or neutral entities who were trying to wisen us up to what we were doing, to encourage us back off the brink of nuclear war, get us ready for our encounter with the exosystem? Were those entities chased off the planet? Did it become untenable for them to operate here after a more intentful, hostile actor took up the presence and began engaging people in very alarming ways? Again, I struggle to see how a beneficial actor who is peaceful, non, not equipped for military action in our space, would contest viably the presence of one that can potentially shoot down U.S. aircraft, as has happened. Potentially, I have a couple pieces of evidence to put up on screen that have disengaged or disabled nuclear weapon systems, put them into an armed state, etc. These are very different kinds of actors, I would imagine, and I struggle to see how they would just um, cohabitate our space at the same time. So maybe we were seeing more positive entities early on in the process of 20th century contact. Maybe that has changed, and we're seeing a more concerted, distilled presence of entities intent on a permanent position, a long-term programmatic engagement with humanity. But we will see. I do think it is pretty alarming in Malcolm's account that the U.S. government, if the statements are true, was engaged in testing nuclear warheads in the upper atmosphere primarily as a UAP takedown energy weapon. That just gives you a sense of the scale of the altercation that potentially has been taking place and still is. Ross Coulthard has been speaking recently, hearing from numerous people within the defense world about this continued effort to shoot down UAP. Um, it's been said elsewhere as well. We have the Golden Dome project beginning back up again under this new administration, possible continuance of Reagan era Star Wars origin level activity, which again, Harold Malmgren did correlate to a UAP takedown, shoot down project. So it just gives you a sense that what is the game that we're in here, right? Is this incidental contact with some benevolent space scientists who, will take some samples, monitor a few individual humans, learn a few things, and then head out? Or is this a full on kinetic conflict potentially with NHI? There's a possibility it is. And if that's the case, I think disclosure is connected to that. I struggle to imagine how a military industrial complex could continue to try to gain tech parity with UAP and potentially defensively oppose their presence to evict them from the Earth system without citizens seeing stuff up in the sky. So, is that one reason why some have spoken to the urgent need for citizens to understand this presence so that greater response can be made, hopefully in a coordinated international way? It's a possibility. Okay, let's move on to another few questions. Let's see here. How can we safeguard our mental environment? Is it possible to set boundaries NHI cannot cross? Is it necessary to project out or communicate what our boundaries are? Again, great questions and wonderful territory to explore on Forerunner. Individually, I would say there are ways that you can create a defensive or protective barrier that you can decide who enters your space versus you have no such decision making authority in your own life. So some of these are a mental shielding set of practices. Um, Also, I think having a spiritual practice, a meditation, is very important as well. This is a whole deep dive to get into, how do you begin to substantiate your presence in the mental space, to assert that presence, to discern or detect abnormalities in your psychic environment, to effectively shield yourself. And if you become an object of interest or feel that you are one to non human presences, whether they're physical or non physical, how do you talk back effectively and maintain a boundary to that? There are a lot of tools and practices there. This is something I'll be teaching on the side on a different platform than Forerunner. I think it's really important. I've been living with this for a long time. I have been, I would almost describe it as I have been swimming in a stream with a very strong current, and I've been swimming upstream. That's how it feels. It is not a neutral environment. A, to begin to focus on this topic, B, to communicate on it, C, to call out various actors who have a part in it. It is not a neutral space. And psi level opposition, even to those activities, I think is real. So how do you maintain yourself in this new contested environment of the psychological realm? It's a great question. I think in time, human beings will be able to converge minds and create um, something of a force of mind that can act in a group fashion to provide some kind of psionic defense. And that will be something that certain people will need to develop and explore in time. Because I think part of this engagement is psi level, it is telepathic, it is not physical. And so this is truly part of the equation. So we need to gain capability in that space. Um, I think there's also the need to create a physical boundary, a technological ability to monitor UAP incursions, to potentially obstruct those incursions, or at least to transmit a communication. Stop, cease and desist. And so, what kind of international body would need to be stood up to formulate that process and the regulation of those technologies? It's enormous. We're in a multi-decade, if not century-long process of figuring out our interface with the ecosystem in which we have lived and demarcating our species boundary and guarding that boundary to such an extent that we can develop organically as a species. Because we can't just believe or hope or wish that others have our best interests in mind. They may not. Doesn't mean they're malevolent at all. It just means they have other interests in mind that are not our own. So that's just logic right there. Do you think a critical mass of humans could stop intervention? Well, again, intervention might be taking place at various levels. Um, that is going to be a very long process itself. There has to be some kind of baseline set of principles that we can agree upon regarding our species identity, meaning we exist in the universe. Others cannot our identity or say that they are us in the future. We need to be able to assert, I would argue, some form of functional autonomy and sovereignty as a single species. And then we need to articulate what are the domains in which that sovereignty is defensible, and what are the transgressions that have taken place in those domains, and what kind of projects do we need to stand up to either begin to figure out what those transgressions have been, how to remediate them, how to confront them, etc. It's a big process, but I think disclosure is the door, and awareness is the foyer that leads to many further rooms in this very large house that we are entering into. So let me move on to another question here. This is from Dan. Let me take a sip of water. Or is it coffee? It is. Something has to fuel the effort. Is your father still in touch with the allies of humanity, or have they withdrawn? And considering what they said in their briefing that potentially beneficial or neutral NHI groups have retreated from the Earth in the wake of the intervention to ensure there is no ambiguity that humanity has about whether those remaining are friend or foe, what do you make of the group in touch with Edward Billy Mayer? Are they part of the interventionist collectives? What about the tall whites that Molten Howe continues to talk about? Do you think it is all bunk or real, or are they part of the collectives? Well, uh, I can't speak for Marshall, but to my knowledge, yes, he's still in contact. They have not retreated. Well, they have. I think you would say they have physically retreated. They are not in the vicinity of the Earth, but they are still observing, and they are still in a supportive position with regards to humanity. Regarding beneficial groups retreating, um, it's a really tricky thing. How are we going to verify claims of a beneficial presence that is physically here, that is physically gifting or transacting things that we think we need, like technology, and that is inviting us into certain federations, collectives, etc.? I mean, some of these claims look rife with disinformation. They look very much like the moment that NHI gets figured out, right? Do they comport themselves over to a new class of entities with a new intent, a beneficial intent, and they're in opposition to the bad ETs, right? They're going to save us from the bad ETs. And the moment we figure out who's really behind that, they comport themselves into a new shape. There is a shape shifting quality to this phenomenon. Um, and it does seem intent to command our perception in certain ways. It is not allowing us to organically perceive it. There is an obstructive, concealing, veiling kind of intent at play. And there are so many competing NHI communications seemingly coming into the world, or claim to be coming into the world, that paint vastly different pictures from one another, right? So it's not like we're hearing mostly the same thing. We're hearing really different things. We're hearing about this prison planet, this galactic federation, soul contracts for abductions. It's getting pretty wild. And so that says to me that the information space is being certainly polluted, but also seeded with manufactured narratives to confuse people further. This is why I would argue that we are not, as a species, in position to make contact at this point. We have another project up ahead. That's the human project. That's getting our act together as a species, getting the public up to speed. We don't need to be engaging in contracts with galactic federations and joining alliances we can barely even understand or verify or the existence of, right? And also, I mean, I do think, I will say as well, I think we can go a little deeper than that. I think we can begin to develop a framework to detect disinformation in these purported communications. I think that's a project that's very possible. There are patterns and trends that we are seeing again and again in these communications, which are interesting data points again. And so I think there are telltale signs of an effort to either undermine faith in human leadership, human self worth. To there's always an ask, right? What's the ask in some of these messages? The Allies of Humanity message is interesting because there's no ask to join anything. The ask is get your act together and use earth-based solutions to solve your problems, and do not transact for anything with anyone yet. No technology, no alliances, no agreements. Don't sit down in the airplane hangar with the National Security Council and some NHI. Don't do it. That's interesting. Prefers that empowers humanity pretty much exclusively, and I think that's a very healthy starting point. So, but yeah, I in my course, Decoding Alien Intent, in the fourth lecture, I'll be going into NHI communications, trust indicators, red flags, what we might be able to use to discern all of these claimed entities and their involvement with humanity. Okay, here's an interesting question from Matthew Hurley. As it is essential to obtain sovereignty over our airspace, do you support the development of technology to bring down alien spacecraft? Well, I don't think I'm in a position myself personally to advocate that um, yet. Until we have full confirmation of what we're shooting down, I am absolutely an advocate of UAP detection efforts, the ability to track and monitor, and at least to transmit our human intentions, to say, transmit a cease and desist, put a shot over the bow. Don't just sink the other ship, put a shot over the bow. Now, those in the military may be smiling at me right now, right? Yeah, we did that. That was the 1960s, buddy. It's gone way beyond that, and I would smile right back at them. I get it, but it's not my position as a civilian to advocate the shoot down of UAP. What I advocate is our human capability to assert sovereignty in our rightful domain, the domain necessary for human life to survive and to develop safely. And so, in that sense, we do need control of the skies, ultimately, control of the ocean, the great basement under our human house that nobody has the key to except them. That's a problem, right? So, I'm about increasing our capabilities for detection. And then we will ultimately get to the point of talking about planetary protection, right? It's an inevitable place to go. But I think we need more disclosure as to the nature of the contest that's taking place to better understand where we stand in that process. Okay, let's scroll further. We have a question from Dan. The abduction genetic hybrid program has been ongoing since the 40s. At least we now must be living alongside many hybrids within our populations that we cannot distinguish from thoroughbred humans. What can we do about that? What do we do about a section of our population that are implanted among us to sway the narrative against the rest of us, becoming aware of the interventionist agenda, or at worst, those within the corridors of power catalyzing wars and chaos to distract us? It's a really difficult part of the phenomenon. That's really what it is. And we do not know the full nature of the genetic alteration that's taken place. There's a lot of discussion about a long-term hybridization program to create human-looking, but fundamentally non-human entities that are allied, or aligned to NHI intentions, and that respond to those, but that also have tremendous psi abilities, well beyond our own. And is that some part of the program to alter the human landscape, to alter our human trajectory developmentally? And ultimately, how do you govern 7 billion unruly humans? Tricky process, right? We're pretty unpredictable, despite being highly predictable. You don't quite know what's going to happen with us down here. These recently ground dwelling apes that have only recently found ways to punch buttons and launch missiles and do a lot of damage and a lot of good too. So, how do you rule over or at least steer the human picture? It would make sense to me if I was a hypersentient entity. What would I do? Well, what I would do is I would take up a long-term observational post. I would learn everything I could. I would take in their full data set. I would engineer a program that basically tests their abilities, their responses, in the form of a predictive, you could call it algorithm. And I would then, once I feel like I know enough, I can predict enough, enter the intimate space of that species, engage, alter the way they think, the way they interact, the way they reproduce, and potentially alter them. Why be satisfied with a 1.0 original human when you can make a 1.1? And maybe if that takes too long to do over many generations, why not make a 2.0 right out of the gate? So it's possible that some kind of program like that could at some point come into being and could create a life form that looks a whole lot like us but is not us. And are we already down that road? Um, so it's a difficult part of the phenomenon. There's not a lot of highly credible evidence out there to tell us exactly the nature of what's going on. It's possible there are multiple genetic intervention programs by competing NHI. It's impossible. So this is to me the urgency, the exigency about getting disclosure done and getting this out into the public. Because one thing to always ask, and I'm asking it every time I bring forward any interesting data point regarding the phenomenon, is who benefits? Who benefits from this strategic ambiguity? Who benefits from this competing narrative, the existence of competing narratives regarding, for example, the abduction phenomenon? Um, and, I think by and large, there might be entities out there that want us to engineer our own confusion in this regard and to generate so many competing theories that we neglect the fact that the pure disclosure of the phenomenon in our world could be enough to stir up so much chaos that any long game, well greased NHI machine would struggle to keep up with. Chaos could be one of our greatest qualities, our greatest assets. Also, our ability to act on intuition, to see, perceive our reality, not through logic, but through instantaneous perception of objective truth. I think we're capable of that. That's an asset. We should use it. But back to the question, who benefits? Who does not benefit from disclosure? From what I can see, whatever the NHI presence is, they would not benefit. They evidently do not want it. So maybe we should press that point home. I think so. All right, let's go down to a question from Ezekiel. Hi, Reed. Thank you so much for creating and holding space for this platform. You're very welcome. Question one: while direct engagement with the public is important, I'm wondering how this might grow. Do you see us eventually having materials or resources we can offer others? Something that helps people get introduced or oriented. What might that look like? Well, ultimately, whatever we need to do is going to converge in the form of a movement. And it's going to be an alliance of people from around the world, from all echelons of human society, all governments, out of government, all religions, and it's going to be fundamentally centered, I believe, on the core values of humanity. I mean, this is really the institution of humanity. It's civilization that we need to uphold and not assume anyone from beyond will do so for us. So I think there is a movement beginning to build. Citizen activism is needed, not just around government secrecy, but on the other side of the coin, right? The true species encounter that's taking place. Do we need materials or resources? Heck yes, we do. Could we put that up on Forerunner and dev that in a group format? Absolutely, we could do that. I would love to further mine my insights regarding talking to the general public about this, because I have I've had a lot of those conversations, and I find it fascinating where people tend to go in their thinking. And so, how can we work with that thinking versus throw people with wild information, speculative ideas about NHI origins and interdimensionality and et cetera, et cetera. It's like people are already predisposed to see this as a physical alien visitation. And guess what? Part of it is. So why not work with that, right? Every time anyone in the disclosure crowd says NHI in the public on an interview, on a TV show, the host look back at them and says, "You mean aliens, right?" And there's no reason to avoid, in my view. Others may have a different belief about that. So, yes, the movement will have to get started. Next question. There are many reported types of beings, craft, and experiences, but personally, I've started to feel like trying to identify or label them all might actually pull focus from the deeper issue, which is the contact itself. Would you say identification is secondary to understanding the intent behind contact? And can people be misled by how these visitors appear, especially when they seem advanced or loving? Well, um, in the history of the phenomenon, there are cases where UAP craft have attempted to mimic, possibly, human craft. You look out in nature, you see animals mimicking each other to gain advantage, access to habitat, to resources. You see it in the insect world. We're going to be talking about that at the next lecture of Decoding Alien Intent. I'm looking forward to that. But yeah, it's very difficult to identify or label the presences operating in our skies. I think there are efforts to do so. Notably, Skywatcher, the organization, has been putting forward a taxonomy of observed UAP craft, which is quite interesting. They're putting out footage of these craft in the air. Ultimately, we do need the ability, the intelligence collection ability, to know who's up there and what the origin of that object or craft is. That's a long way away. Um, but I think we need to work in that direction. I do agree with you. I think the deeper issue is the contact taking place. If we can conclude that this is happening, we turn to the human side of the coin and we get our human species ready for it, whatever the intent is. Now, we could almost put intent absolutely on the back burner and say we need to equip ourselves to engage with other sentient technological forms of life. Whew. Well, what do we need to do that? It's a lot of work. There are definitely some government public policies, international treaties, science and research programs that need to get spun up to do that. And by and large, I don't see those conversations happening. We're not acting like we're being contacted, right? We're acting like we're keeping secrets from each other. That's the wrong framing of the entire event. And I don't think it's an accident it's being framed that way, right? Again, who benefits? Who benefits? All right, next question. Some people describe these visitors as full of love and light, but I wonder if those qualities could be used to manipulate or win trust. How do we build real discernment so we're not just following what feels good or hopeful, especially when those feelings could be used against us? Yes, I think this is a process each person goes through. You might start on the positive side of wanting to see this as good. I think that's natural. I think you have to come to understand what you want out of this event, right? What do I want out of contact? And, if you can kind of articulate that to yourself, at least keep that in view, then it won't make you as vulnerable as if it is unconscious and driving one's inquiry into the phenomenon. I think there are a lot of messages of love and light regarding this. A lot of talk of indigo children, star seeds, again, soul contracts to engage in ways that are possibly a little alarming, right? So, there are a lot of suspect signals, and that's why I think pulling back from seeing this as a love and light. I mean, I wouldn't frame it as love and light or death and damnation or hell, or I mean, these are all bulk framings of what is really a nuanced phenomenon. It could be more of an expression of nature itself than anything else. So, this whole good, light, dark, bad, evil, angelic, we don't even need to go there. We need to observe behavior. We need to analyze the data set we already have, arrive at key indicators, and devise real research and investigations that would verify whether key parameters are truly at play. And I would say it is in the most intimate quarters of contact that those key parameters exist. And by and large, we have access. We have access to society. That's where the contact is taking place. It's not with the military, it's with human beings, society. We have access to those folks. And who has engaged them consistently and methodically? We can't take the experience at face value. Just because you felt good in the encounter doesn't mean it necessarily was good. It also doesn't necessarily mean a crime wasn't committed. Forced removal from one's home is a crime. Undisclosed medical experiments is aggravated assault. It's a crime. So we need to be thinking like the humans that we are. We need to be standing firm on our frameworks that steer human society in ways that keep people safe, aka laws, right? Our human laws apply to anyone who enters our human space and interacts with us physically. I would argue, but who has done that legal analysis, that legal articulation or reinterpretation of existing law as it pertains to NHI? That's another project that has yet to be done. So there's just so much work to get going on. Okay. With so much secrecy around contact and the confusion it creates, what do you think people really need right now? Are there tools or messages that would help people become more aware and grounded? Should we be focusing on community level work, broader outreach, or something else? Well, it kind of depends on who you're talking to. So, in the UAP crowd, I would challenge people to question the phenomenon and to think with instinct and logic and all the other human capabilities, because that's not happening. We are not interrogating the phenomenon. We are interrogating each other. So get on a podcast, get on forums, call out certain activities of UAP and NHI, potential NHI. People love to quote and highlight the most well-known cases, but there are other cases in the historical record that would cause us to consider other alternative explanations. And I put out four of them just before this show, and I'd actually want to walk through these together. These are four altercations that were reported with potential UAP in the air by pilots. And, this makes you scratch your head a little bit and wonder, is this really observational or is this actually something else? And so the UAP crowd needs to have their eyeballs on these. The Mantell incident, 1948. U.S. Air Force Captain Thomas Mantell, flying a F-51 Mustang, was dispatched to pursue bigger, a high altitude UFO over Kentucky. He died when his aircraft crashed during the chase. Witnesses described a large metallic object, and Mantell himself reported a, quote, tremendous object ahead and above, moving at half my speed. The incident marked the first known case of a pilot dying while engaging an unidentified aerial object like this. Okay, that's interesting. Not to say it was hostile in intent, but here's the flight safety risk. Move down to the Kinross incident, 1953. An F-89C Scorpion interceptor was scrambled from Kinross Air Force Base to investigate an unknown radar target over Lake Superior. Radar operators observed the F-89 merge with the target on screen, after which contact with both was lost. The aircraft and its two-man crew were never found. Although the Air Force labeled it a likely crash, UFO researchers noted the bizarre radar, quote, merge and total absence of debris. suggesting possibly the unknown object may have been forcibly taken or destroyed. I'm sorry, that it had taken or forcibly destroyed the interceptor. Okay, on that topic of forced movement in the air, this is a fascinating case. The Coin helicopter encounter, the UH-1 Huey helicopter, piloted by Captain Lawrence Coyne, encountered a bright cigar-shaped UFO near Mansfield, Ohio. The craft rapidly approached head-on, emitted a bright green beam into the cockpit. Immediately, the helicopter's controls felt overridden, and the aircraft was mysteriously pulled upward several hundred feet. Investigated by J. Allen Hynek and reported in detail to the FAA. Again, I don't hear cases like this being discussed, right? And so it's not just the Nimitz encounter. It's not just the USS Roosevelt encounter. I think that was the one in 2015. There are other incidents of altercations in the air. Frederick Valentiche disappearance, 1978. A 20-year-old pilot radioed Melbourne air traffic control to report an unidentified craft, quote, playing games above him. He described a large UFO with bright lights circling overhead. Contact ended abruptly with metallic scraping sounds. He and his Cessna 182L vanished over the Bass Strait and were never found. A lot of these cases have corroborating documentation from government agencies, from flight safety crews, etc., ground witnesses. You know, this is part of what we need to get out into the public domain. When talking to the public itself, you know, let me get back to the let's see, get out of the lab, go over to the AMA question thread. Let's see, where were we? I think we were up here. Yes, we were. Um, what do people need right now? I mean, that's a great question. Um, I think some people need to expand into the possibilities of this phenomenon, and there are many good platforms for expanding. I think other people are exhausted expanding into the ever limitless bounds of the universe and need to get to clarity and need to figure out what the hell this means for them and the species, the human species. And I don't think anyone really, to my knowledge, has been talking in terms of citizen action on this topic. Disclosure action, yes, but action regarding the phenomenon, and that is what I and Emergent Forerunner are about stimulating, is there are ways to take action. I'm gonna save that for the end of the show. We'll get into that more specifically. Okay, let's see here. Last question, from Ezekiel. How can we begin sharing this with a wider audience, especially people who aren't already in these circles? Okay, I'll say that for the end. That's a simple question. All right. This is another question here from Frank. My question is, please, how much credence do you give to the work of David Jacobs? I've delved deeply into his work, but was told by a scientist who worked for NIDS, OSAP, ATIP, and UAP task force that he did not consider Jacobs' research methods to be sound in terms of the means used to extract the information from subjects, and that his work was geographically restricted. I don't think his work was geographically restricted. He engaged people all over the world. I met David Jacobs, wow, almost 20 years, over 20 years ago. I attended a lecture by the Intruders Foundation in New York City, where I think that was the first instance in the public where he brought forward this fascinating account by an individual about an individual named Eric, who, as was as was shared by the contactee abductee, an individual who walked out of the middle of nature on I believe it was a fishing trip in maybe Canada. It was like in the Northern Shield, Canada, possibly. This individual walked out of the middle of nowhere on a remote fishing trip and engaged this businessman, this individual, who was the individual Dr. David Jacobs worked with. And this individual became something of a babysitter for this anomalous person named Eric, and was engaged in a multi-year process of onboarding him to all facets of being a functional human being, taking up a leadership position in an organization, etc. Um, I know this is anecdotal. I'm not getting to your question, but I just do want to share. I believe this case was referenced in Dr. David Jacobs' last book, Walking Among Us. It was in one of the first few chapters. This person, I cannot remember the abductee's name, was at a business conference years after first meeting Eric. He had many conscious recollections of Eric. It was not all under hypnosis. He had taken photographs of this individual, which he held in his possession for many years. This individual, Eric, he hadn't seen him for many, many years, walked up to him, I believe in the bathroom of the venue of this conference, this business conference, turned to the abductee, who had not seen Eric in many years, and said, I want to thank you for everything you did. I want you to know that I'm ready now. I'm prepared. Like I've achieved integration. And then the individual walked away, Eric. Fascinating. Definitely stuck with me that David Jacobs has worked with people over long periods of time, not only through hypnosis. I know even in David Jacobs, one of his books might have been The Threat. He talks about how his early hypnosis regression sessions did not use good methodology. And so I think he accounted for that and improved it through his work with Bud Hopkins and others. In my opinion, David Jacobs' work is important, critical, and I've had a chance to talk to him at length. I actually dropped him a line recently. I'm not sure he's available to to connect. I didn't hear back, which was unfortunate, but I do want to get in touch. So I would hold his work and findings. I wouldn't say it's absolutely the Bible truth of what's taken place, but as highly valuable to decoding the nature of the encounters that people have experienced. Thanks for bringing up David Jacobs' work, Frank. Another question from Frank here. Recent Jake Barber comments allege there is a competition between contractors around exotic tech. I've also been hearing of, quote, contacts, firefights between members of JSOC and private contractors. Also about private contractors harassing, using direct energy weapons and potentially lethal means against scientists engaged in UAP research who are not working for aerospace companies. Wondering if you have heard anything about this. Yes, much the same. Um, I don't really investigate too deeply into the human on human side of what the private defense world is doing with the government. I think there are strong indications that the government has lost control of this issue. Matthew Brown spoke to it directly in his interview with um, weaponized Jeremy Corbell and George Knapp. That basically this has been externalized from the control of government into some kind of international corporate black cabal, as I think he put it, um, that has profited off of this technology and potentially its presence. Man, I think we've got a problem on our hands, folks. This has gone out of control. It is absolutely out of control. And that is exactly, I believe, what those who have come forward, Lou Elizondo, David Grush, uh, Carl Nell, have spoken to. And I think that's the case. Is NHI embedded with any of these entities? That's another layer to this possible reality. I don't think they're neutral observers. I don't think they just randomly allowed us to shoot down certain craft or deposited this craft and they're just watching to see what we do in a grand kind of little contained playground experiment. I think some of these technologies are being seeded and alliances potentially are being formed. Um, and what else is being transacted? God, who knows, right? So, but there is definitely a hot fight going human on human and potentially human to NHI, that is being reported in the public right now. Yeah. Okay, question from Russell. To what degree do you believe our global political and economic environment is currently being influenced by aliens? The aliens have shown an ability to completely subdue and control the minds of abductees, according to testimony. If you had to speculate, how prevalent would that kind of activity be amongst the most powerful people in the world? Well, the UAP activity has always been focused on power centers. It's always been interested in our military capabilities, in our tip of the spear science, quote unquote, as was relayed to Harold Malmgren. by Bissell, I believe, one of the architects of the military-industrial complex as it is in relationship to this issue. So, that they would take an interest in individuals who have tremendous power in the world makes total sense to me. Why would they only engage us, the peons of society, when the king, the queen, the rook are right there, right? And there's not that many of them. There's not that many super billionaires, right? The world's governments are commanded by a relative few, especially step outside the context of Western liberal democracies. So NHI doesn't have to necessarily influence tremendous numbers of people to a great extent. There might be some kind of attempt to influence society broadly in a more of a background fashion, either to distract or to agitate or to generate conflict or to shape human perception of NHI. But in terms of targeted precision strike, in the cyber technology world, there's these terms whaling, spearing, spear fishing, right? Going after high value targets. Because if you crack open that target, gain access to what they know, or can even control their activity, which in the cyber technology world is their online activity, the granting of access, for example. Well, in the psi level, right? What could a powerful individual grant uh, an actor of some kind? Um, you know? And so if I were them, I would probably focus my limited energies on a few and try to enact some kind of neurological control mechanism over those individuals to alter their perception of reality, to make them more paranoid, more aggressive, more impulsive. In the case of possibly more belligerent actors in the world, we do see a lot of belligerence out there by certain world leaders. On the part of others, to to divide on the basis of political party, partisanship, self-interest, self-gain, to stimulate these kinds of incentives in certain people. Has NHI potentially made in back rooms for whether it's world supremacy, access to key technologies, access to core science in ways that would generate supremacy? God knows, right? But they certainly, we can determine this. They have the goods, right? These craft have the energetic potential to power cities, countries for years, right? I think it was reported or surmised. This might have been I'm not sure where I heard this. I think it was out of the OSAP program. It was estimated that one triangular UAP, based upon its mass and its kinetic movement, had the power to wipe out an entire seaborne battle fleet. That's how much energy potential this craft possessed. So they have it, right? They have these capabilities. Do they offer them? We don't know. In exchange for what? We don't know. Who are they offering them to if they are? We don't know, right? But there is a big tech arms race going on. And I think we would be right to begin to question our rapid rush to develop powerful technologies without necessary safe controls, like, for example, in the case of AI. So, definitely part of the frontiers we'll get into on Forerunner. Okay, we're getting to the hour and a half mark. I said I would do 90 minutes today. I'll go another 10 minutes, and maybe I'll skip through. I'll reload the page in case any new questions come in. Okay, and let's go down here to the bottom to this anonymous individual named Business Optional. Question one: what, in your estimation, is the chance that we are being totally mind controlled and are only being fed alien bread and circuses for ritualistic karmic purposes? Okay, to explain, what if we've basically already lost? They successfully infiltrated all the needed power structures and are now absolving themselves of any cosmic crime by feeding us surgically, dead on arrival, predicted, approved, and game planned NHI news to get us just excited, to have that glimmer of hope, but not enough to break the dam and stir up the masses of docile cows. Very colorful question. Thank you. Um, I don't see signs that we have been en masse taken over mentally, politically, behind the scenes. Um, I would guess that the NHI are engaged in a very long game program. I don't think this is just my opinion. I don't think we're at the end of the game. I don't think this is the ninth inning, right? We're somewhere in the middle of the engagement. There's also, the human curveball that we continue, I would imagine, to throw at them. They don't yet fully know what we will do. I don't know if disclosure in 2017 was part of the plan. I don't know if hearings in Congress in 2023 were part of the plan, right? So we humans can continue to throw curveballs. I don't think it's also a healthy position to take to conclude that we are totally taken over, totally controlled, everything is already done, solved. I think that's quite a a nihilistic position, and it doesn't lead to a constructive sense of involvement or personal will to get involved. It's quite defeatist, and we don't need defeatism. The positions we take, the assessments we make, we want them to be accurate, but we also want them to have high utility, to be workable, right? And so this whole NHI control mechanism, they've engineered our religions, they're all cargo cults, they're all NHI worship mechanisms. The government's engineered, taken over by hybrids. Human genetics altered 80,000 years ago, done deal. I just don't think there's any utility to those conclusions, right? They do not prefer good human outcomes. And so if your intention is to be a part of this bigger game to get humanity over the line and into whatever that exosystemic reality is, I don't think we should take that position, even if there are hints and clues out there that might suggest that something like that might be at play. Right, I'll take another question here, and then I'll move on to the next person. What, in your estimation, is the chance that we have been modeled, cloned, and are now living inside a Lockheed DARPA simulation, and your true self had his eyes forcibly covered over by a virtual reality lens? I don't think that's what's at play. I think, again, there are certain actors who may want us to think that way to get us out of the game. How do you neutralize the very few people who have a sense of what's going on and prevent them from being effective? You make you take the information they have and you make them think you make them think even more extremely or take a more extreme position with it. You might also introduce false information that again relegates them to the sideline, makes them more extreme in their position. This is how you maintain the eddy and keep people from entering the mainstream of humanity. UFO, I was on a show this morning on Night Shift, great conversation. We're talking about this UFO eddy. Something continues to get us back into this self fulfilling prophecy regarding the need for hard evidence. There's not enough of it. We need more whistleblowers. They're not coming out. We need to explore and expand into the conscious universe. Okay, it's an endless eddy, and we cannot break out of that and get into the mainstream of humanity. I'll tell you one thing: when I talk to new people who are new to this phenomenon, about this phenomenon, I don't bring up ideas of total control, of 100% hybrid takeover. I don't put that in front of them because there's no utility there. It doesn't get them engaged. So again, are we exploring or are we responding? If we're responding, everything has a purpose with which to respond. So that's kind of how I frame it in my mind. Okay, a question from Stella. Hi, Stella. If NHI are influencing humanity and manipulating us through our thoughts, is there a way to counteract this manipulation, perhaps by group mind, somehow that is safe? Well, this is a tricky thing. And we're just at the beginning of this process of even individually exerting force of mind. So I think that's the first step. Uh, First pre-step to that step is simply to strengthen yourself as a person. The stronger you are, mental health, physical health, the more self-aware you are, the more you know about the components of your experience, whether that's in whatever emotional makeup you have, past traumas, etc., mental health challenges that could be a part of your experience. Got to take those into account. That's just 101 right there. 102 is beginning to understand your mental psychic environment. What are the forces and components? Some of those are all too human, right? And so, can you affect change in those relationships? If not, NHI is a next level up. All right. 103, exerting force. So, I think there are definite practices each person can develop to generate psychic force through real mental imagery with, again, energy put behind it. Think Imagine expanding a sphere around yourself of protection, but adding color, light, texture, thickness, layering, and use mental force to generate it. And as you go about your day, rebuild that sphere, resubstantiate it. That is one practice in mental shielding that I use. So, get used to doing that. Okay, that's an individual. Could that come together as a group? Absolutely. I think so. And over time, individuals who are like minded should come together. And so, hopefully, Forerunner can be that kind of a place. I think another component here is we can't necessarily protect ourselves from everything that's out there. We are, in essence, like fish in the sea. The water of the ocean is passing through our psychic gills. We can't filter it all out. There are bigger fish out there, right? But there are ways that we can swim intelligently and in ways that don't put us next to the big fish. I don't recommend engaging in telepathic communication with NHI generally, right? Because there are powerful forces, there are big fish. And why would you swim close to them, especially when you can't confirm their intentions? I would eschew this rush to psionic engagement. I would develop your own capabilities in private. I would begin to develop your the medium by which you press up against the environment, not necessarily an entity. So people get into this me and them thing, right? They're talking to me, they're controlling me, they're in my mind, and they build up this narrative of almost psychic corralling or even psychic enslavement. I don't recommend that dynamic. Stay autonomous and strong and learn to function in the ecosystem. As you encounter things, push off and build barriers until you feel truly ready to engage and to discern what it is that's trying to contact you. So that would be my recommendation. But if you're in this for the long haul, then yes, eventually, I think at a group level, humanity will need to develop psionic, defensive, protective. All right, I'll take one more question. Comes from Dan. Don, sorry, Don. Too many sensitive people, and not necessarily those who are religious. The NHI have all the characteristics of the jinn or demonic denizens of the etheric plane now appearing to be merging or interpenetrating with the physical. It is well known in perennial spiritual philosophy of all religions that these negative lower entities are interdimensional and covert and covet human life and its vitality. Okay. I'm not seeing a question here. I have heard similar things. I don't rule out that possibility that there are non physical entities working with physical NHI in certain ways. I'm going to move on and see if there's a question on page number 2. I go to Lauren's question. I'm sorry if this is not an intellectual question. You shouldn't be sorry for that. All questions are welcome. It's an AMA. But do you have any information about how they can pull us through solid matter? Does this have negative physical impacts on our bodies? Wow, I do not. I do not know how that is possible. I've heard statements of what is it, subatomic cloaking. That's something that Linda Moulton Howe talks about. Have they found a way to dematerialize or enter an etheric, to use that word, or interdimensional, transdimensional plane of existence and then transit back into the physical dimension? I don't know. I do not know how that works. I know many experiencers have recounted being taken through solid surfaces. So, is that at a psi level? Like, is that an abduction of consciousness? Is that a false memorization of the physical encounter? Or do they have technologies that can pass physical beings, us, through physical matter? So I think that's definitely possible, but I do not understand how that takes place. Now, as we wrap up, and thank you so much, by the way, for all the questions. It's been great to engage. This is the first true dialogue I feel like I've had with the Emergent crowd. So good to be with you all. And keep your eyes peeled on Forerunner for many more great engagements to come. But before we close up, I'd like to just look at this question of what can we do? What can we do? Because I know I talk a lot about the critical nature of what's going on, but I don't talk all that much about what an individual can do in response to it. So let's get into that for a minute here. And if you have further questions, post them on the AMA thread, and I'll reply to them in text. So, you know, starting from the ground up, strengthen yourself as a life form in this meeting of minds and bodies. Second, begin to understand that there is a telepathic psi level engagement going on. And I would argue that your education and psychic environment must begin, as mine has had to begin. This is part of what it means to engage other forms of intelligent life. Stay on the side of humanity. Um, Help to bring the controversy back where it belongs and prevent this slide back to a human war of finger pointing and and attempts to undermine each other. And let's keep articulating the whole species level event of contact that is taking place. I would say take up your part in whatever you feel called to do. Do you need to get more educated? Do you need to dive into the history? Do you need to understand one parameter of this phenomenon? Like, for example, direct experiencer accounts. That's something that's a deep dive. Um, do you need to get out there on the social networks and argue for some of the principles of Emergent and Forerunner? Logic, reason, observation before assumption. Um, Arguing for the fact that there is a skeleton in the dirt right there. We don't need to scatter the bones all the time and go back to square one. It's phenomenal. We know some things. We should build upon those. I do think making your assessment and articulating that out in the public is good. It's good for people to hear from people who say, what I think is happening is this, but here's how I came to that conclusion. That's the key. I think there are real citizen activist advocacy science efforts that you can become a part of. There are some organizations doing good work. I recommend you support them. I'll just read this little list of organizations here. I've had some contact with a lot of them. I've had some of them on the show Emergent. I'll be having more on later. I'm working with a few on some projects, but I'll just read these to you. I recommend you write them down, learn about them. What are they doing? This is the nascent capability of our human species to understand our planetary environment and have a sense of control over what enters and what it does. Skywatch project, passive radar tracking of UAP. And then you look into that. Skywatcher, different organization, doing field UAP detection through both psionic and technological means. Dog whistle, look that up. What is the UFO dog whistle? UFO DAB, Sky 360, the Galileo Project, Tedesco Nightcrawler, UAPX, SCU, the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies, continues to do great research. All these organizations are out there in the field in various capacities, trying to build up our societal understanding of the phenomenon. Project Hestelen in Norway, just got a ping from them this morning on their show, and I'll be in touch. So many good efforts. So support those. Citizen disclosure, support that. And also, if you feel inclined, support the process of church, religious, sacred bodies, communities interfacing with this in ways that do not deconstruct their faith and the origins of their belief structure, that do not ascribe divine qualities to NHI, that do not make the NHIs into gods or God into an NHI. The religions of the world have quite a hurdle to get over to process this event and help to onboard their constituents. So, if you're connected to a religious organization, help them come to understand a physical, non human, extraterrestrial presence and how to process that, how to apply whatever their theology is to understanding it. That's really important too. Um, is there anything else I would say right now? I think there has to be some there have to be some forerunners, people who are willing to go into the harder aspects of the phenomenon, the potential hostile activity of the phenomenon, of part of the phenomenon, and to go get with those who have had real difficult and traumatic personal experiences of it. There has to be someone attending to that side of this larger human processing of the event. you feel like you have the stomach for it, I'm putting out the Shackleton's Adventure Bulletin right in front of your face, looking for people willing to endure terrible weather, poor food, months at sea, but to participate in the greatest adventure of our time. That is my Shackleton's offer to you. That is Forerunner. Be a forerunner. Be out ahead of the conversation, not irresponsibly speculating and taking at face value all of the hearsay and all of whatever might have been injected into the dialogue. No, advance the very forward line of our observations and evidence collecting ability and target those efforts right to uncover the very most important and intimate parameters of how the phenomenon is interacting with us. There are real ways to get involved. If you're moved by that offer, let me know. Shackleton's invitation right up there in front of you. You can email me at info@reedsummers.com. Maybe I can route interested people to the right cause or initiative. I know there are a lot of them out there. So please do get involved. I want to also invite you next Tuesday at 5 o'clock Mountain Time, 7 o'clock Eastern. I'm going to be hosting the second AMA of Forerunner with former guest of the show, Joshua Pearson, with whom I did an epic, almost 3-hour episode on intelligence and counterintelligence strategies and tools and techniques to decode the intent of the phenomenon. So, if you want to query a true career professional, one who has seen everything from information to disinformation, psychological operations to good-hearted government action to inform citizens. If he has observed how those programs take place, come over to Forerunner, hit the homepage. Josh will be here with me on video, answering your questions in the exact same format as I did today. So hope you can be there. My next episode of Emergent will be taking place at a secret, undisclosed location somewhere on Earth, but not here, not from the studio. I'll be on the road, so I look forward to giving that to you. You'll know where I am once I say where I am. And with that, folks, I'll say good night, good luck. Thank you for being a forerunner. Thank you for finding a way to endeavor upon these frontiers of the phenomenon. And we have to do this for the human interest and the human cause. So thank you so much. Uh, and also thank you for all your support of Emergent. Keep sharing the show, like and subscribe as you know, and as you already have, I'm sure. And let's get more people watching. All right. With that, I'll say goodnight. Take care, everyone.